Comment down below where you're watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe if you hate Karen. In the opening of this story, Alexander Pierce, the narrator, introduces himself and sets the tone for the upcoming drama. He's a middle-aged man struggling with exhaustion due to his wife Sarah's recent hospitalization. Sarah has fallen seriously ill with a sudden infection, and Alexander has been by her side almost constantly, supporting her while trying to stay strong. The mention of running on fumes highlights how emotionally and physically drained he is by the situation. Alexander's description of his state of mind is poignant, emphasizing the emotional toll of watching his wife suffer without being able to fix the situation. His thoughts are filled with anxiety over her condition and the sterile hospital environment. He is torn between wanting to be there for Sarah and the overwhelming feeling of helplessness that comes with such situations. This sets up the contrast for the incident that will unfold later, where Alexander is about to be thrust into a confrontation with his entitled and racist neighbor, Karen, who is later revealed as Deborah Miller. The contrast between his emotional state and the upcoming absurd encounter with Deborah adds to the humor and absurdity of the situation. This part of the story sets the stage for the explosive interaction that will follow, grounding the drama and the struggles of daily life while also hinting at the karmic payback for Deborah's actions. After a long, exhausting day, Alexander Pierce arrives home around 3:30 a.m., hoping to get some much-needed rest before heading back to the hospital to be with his wife, Sarah. He's drained, emotionally and physically, and all he wants is a few hours of sleep to recharge. He parks Sarah's beloved pink Jeep in the driveway, a car that always reminds him of her, and makes his way inside, exhausted but hopeful for a brief respite. However, his peace is shattered just moments after he collapses into bed. At 4 a.m., loud banging shakes him awake. At first, he wonders if it's just a product of his anxiety and tiredness, but as the noise continues, he realizes it's real. He rushes out of bed, his heart pounding, only to be met by the sight of Deborah Miller, his entitled neighbor, standing beside his pink Jeep and attempting to physically move it out of his driveway. Deborah is an embodiment of Karen-like behavior, an aggressive, self-righteous neighbor, the type who believes her entitlement extends to controlling others' property. Her actions alone are baffling. Why would she try to move someone else's car at 4 a.m.? When Alexander confronts her, she responds with a thinly veiled arrogance. Deborah calmly informs him that her guests need the space to park for brunch, at an unreasonably early hour. The sheer absurdity of the situation makes Alexander question whether he's dreaming. He explains that his driveway is, in fact, his property and that her guests can park elsewhere. But Deborah's response shows her total disregard for his words. She insists, using the typical Karen mantra, that she is the president of the HOA, Homeowners Association, and expects her demands to be followed without question. She escalates the situation by threatening to tow Alexander's car if it's not moved immediately. Frustrated beyond belief, Alexander stands firm. He is dealing with the pain of watching his wife suffer in the hospital and is in no mood for Deborah's childish power plays. He tries to reason with her, but her tone only grows more aggressive. Deborah, taking offense to his refusal, continues to press her unwarranted demands, trying to use her HOA authority to manipulate him. In the face of her escalating behavior, Alexander holds his ground. He's been polite and reasonable, but Deborah doesn't seem to care. Her sense of entitlement and her complete disregard for his own needs create an undeniable tension. She's already ruined his attempt to get rest, and now, she's doing everything in her power to make him feel like his own property and time mean nothing. The encounter is a classic example of entitlement gone overboard. As Deborah Miller continues to demand Alexander move his car, she begins to unravel into full-blown Karen mode. Her sense of entitlement reaches new heights as she insists on receiving special treatment, even though she's clearly in the wrong. She tells Alexander that if he doesn't comply with her request, she will have his car towed, all the while acting as though her words are absolute commands. Alexander, exhausted, emotionally drained, and still deeply concerned about his wife's health, tries to reason with her. However, Deborah is not listening to reason. She has a singular focus: getting her way. She claims that the car in his driveway is blocking her guests, who she insists need the space to park for a brunch, at 4 a.m. The sheer absurdity of the situation only deepens Alexander's frustration. The conversation continues in circles, with Deborah trying to impose her will and Alexander rejecting her authority. As Deborah grows more hostile, she plays the victim, calling Alexander rude and disrespectful. She escalates things further by bringing up the fact that she's the president of the HOA, using her position to assert her authority over him. She begins threatening him, saying she'll call the police and make him pay for his disrespect. What makes this situation even more absurd is the timing. Deborah is trying to escalate a trivial issue, parking in a private driveway, into something far more serious at a time when Alexander is clearly overwhelmed and struggling to balance personal crises. With his wife still in the hospital, he has no energy for petty HOA drama. Yet, Deborah's entitlement seems to know no bounds. In a moment of frustration and exhaustion, Alexander finally responds with the sharpness he's been holding back. He tells Deborah that he's done trying to be reasonable and that he's not going to tolerate her harassment any longer. He stands his ground, refusing to give in to her demands. The line has been crossed. Deborah, not one to back down easily, pulls out her phone and threatens to call the police. As soon as Deborah Miller pulls out her phone and threatens to call the police, the situation takes a dramatic turn. Alexander, who had been trying to remain calm, is now faced with a situation that feels utterly surreal. Deborah, in her anger and sense of entitlement, calls 911. Alexander stands there, stunned, unsure whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. She's actually calling the police because he refused to move his car from his own driveway so her guests could park at 4 a.m. While Deborah continues her rant on the phone, Alexander retreats into the house, deciding to document the situation for his own peace of mind. He pulls up his door camera and starts recording, ensuring he has clear evidence of what's unfolding. He knows that if this situation goes south, having video footage of her actions could be crucial. While Deborah dials 911, she continues her tirade, now adding racist microaggressions to her already bizarre list of complaints. As Deborah complains about Alexander's refusal to comply, she makes condescending remarks like, "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." Her words drip with racial bias, and Alexander, though seething with anger, keeps his composure. He doesn't want to escalate further, but her constant belittling and the way she tries to manipulate the situation adds to his frustration. The accusations are not just about his refusal to move the car, they are personal and aimed at undermining him based on his race. The fact that she has the gall to say these things so openly in front of him makes the whole situation feel even more humiliating. Deborah's sense of entitlement has reached its peak. She sees herself as someone above the rules, someone who can dictate what others do, when they do it, and how they do it. And if they refuse, she resorts to calling the police, taking it to a level that far outweighs the original issue. Meanwhile, Alexander feels like he's trapped in a never-ending nightmare, where every attempt at calm reasoning is met with more absurdity and more condescension. Yet, he knows he has to stay calm for the sake of his family, especially for Sarah, who is still in the hospital. Finally, the police arrive, sirens blaring, lights flashing. Alexander's heart sinks as he watches the officers approach, but he hopes that the truth will eventually come out. Deborah, however, is already in full victim mode. She starts her sob story the moment the officers step out of their vehicle, trying to paint Alexander as the villain in this ridiculous scenario. She claims that he's being aggressive, that he's refusing to let her guests park, and she even starts to cry, painting herself as the innocent party who has been wronged by an unreasonable neighbor. The police officers, though, aren't as easily fooled as Deborah might think. They listen to her story with mild confusion but also skepticism. Officer Miller, one of the officers, looks at Deborah and asks her to explain the situation. It's clear that Deborah is struggling to make her case sound plausible, but she tries anyway. She claims that Alexander is blocking her guests' access to her property and that he's been rude and uncooperative. After listening to Deborah, the officers turn to Alexander for his side of the story. Alexander calmly explains everything: the hospital situation with his wife, his refusal to move his car, and Deborah's harassment. He's confident that the truth will prevail, but still, there's a sense of doubt as the officers take in both sides. Then, Alexander remembers his door camera. With a calm yet confident tone, he tells the officers that he has the entire incident on video. The moment the officers view the footage, their expressions shift. What had seemed like an unclear situation suddenly becomes crystal clear. The video shows Deborah attempting to move his car, making derogatory comments, and calling the police over something so petty and ridiculous. The officers, visibly shocked and disappointed, now see the situation for what it truly is. After reviewing the footage, the officer's demeanor shifts from confusion to clear disbelief. Officer Miller addresses Deborah with a level of professionalism that contrasts sharply with her dramatic display. His words are firm. "Ma'am, it looks like you called us here under false pretenses, and it seems you were attempting to tamper with Mr. Pierce's vehicle. That's a serious offense." The look on Deborah's face turns from self-righteousness to pure shock. The situation she thought she was going to win so easily is now completely out of her control. She sputters, trying to explain herself, but her words lack conviction. The officer's skepticism is evident, and they begin asking her for identification. Deborah, now realizing the gravity of the situation, is instructed to show proof of ownership of the property she had claimed was hers. Her previous confidence falters as she stumbles for answers. Her face flushes with humiliation as the officers proceed to write her a citation for filing a false police report and attempting to tamper with Alexander's vehicle. Deborah, who had thought she could manipulate the situation with her position as the HOA president, is now facing the consequences of her own actions. Alexander watches the scene unfold, a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction welling up inside him. He had expected some form of justice, but seeing Deborah finally confronted with the truth is a moment of pure vindication. After everything she put him through, especially during a time when he was at his most vulnerable, seeing her face the music is deeply satisfying. As Deborah is led away by the officers, her face contorted with a combination of rage and regret, Alexander can't help but feel a sense of relief. It's over. He's been harassed, belittled, and racially targeted, but now, Deborah has no power over him. The whole situation, which started with an absurd request about moving a car at 4 a.m., has led to Deborah facing the consequences of her false accusations and entitlement. One of the officers, Officer Miller, turns to Alexander and offers an apology for the intrusion. "I'm sorry you had to deal with this, Mr. Pierce," he says. Alexander nods, appreciating the officer's professionalism throughout the ordeal. As the police leave, Alexander goes back inside, still processing everything that just happened. But there's a sense of satisfaction that comes with standing his ground and refusing to let Deborah bully him. Back at the hospital, Alexander returns to Sarah, holding her hand and feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in days, the beeping of the machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic don't feel as suffocating. There's a glimmer of hope, not just for Sarah's recovery but for everything in his life, his home, his family, and the vindication he's just received. The next day, Alexander Pierce is still reeling from the events that transpired in the early morning. As the adrenaline of the confrontation fades, he begins to process everything that happened, how Deborah Miller tried to manipulate the situation to her advantage, only to end up embarrassed and facing serious consequences. The fallout doesn't stop with her citation. As Alexander heads back to the hospital to be with Sarah, the ripple effect of the night's events begins to make itself known. To Alexander's surprise, the neighborhood, which had previously been polite but distant, is now showing overwhelming support. People who had barely nodded to him in the past are now coming by with casseroles, offering words of encouragement, and sharing their own stories of having been mistreated by Deborah or other members of the HOA. The once silent community seems to be coming together, united by the shared understanding that Deborah had crossed a line. There's an unspoken acknowledgement that she had abused her position and used her privilege to belittle others. Even Mr. Henderson, the notoriously grumpy president of the HOA, stops by to apologize for Deborah's actions. He admits that he and others in the community had known about Deborah's behavior for years but hadn't done enough to address it. Alexander is taken aback by the apology, but it's clear that the community is now rallying against Deborah's misdeeds. However, the most significant twist comes when Alexander receives a letter from the HOA. The letter states that Deborah Miller's actions have violated the HOA's code of conduct to such an extent that she's being ousted from her position as president. The HOA board had been inundated with complaints about her overbearing behavior, and they were finally taking action. This unexpected turn brings a sense of justice to Alexander, knowing that Deborah's reign of entitlement and manipulation is finally over. As if that wasn't enough, Alexander soon hears a rumor that Deborah's house is up for sale. Word on the street is that Deborah's actions had not only led to her removal from the HOA, but also to her facing serious financial troubles. Alexander can't help but chuckle at the irony of it all. After the chaos she caused, she's now paying the price for her entitlement. As the weeks pass, the fallout from Deborah Miller's actions continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Alexander Pierce, now feeling a sense of relief after the events with Deborah, starts to notice a significant shift in the neighborhood. The changes are small at first. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves are now friendly and open. The community feels more united, more supportive, and it's clear that Deborah's toxic influence is finally being eradicated. But Alexander isn't done yet. He's been keeping an eye on Deborah and her situation, and he's about to get the most satisfying piece of karmic justice yet. Deborah, who had once made his life miserable with petty complaints and harassment, now finds herself in a deeply ironic position. The property she had once so fiercely tried to control is slipping through her fingers. Alexander learns from a trusted source that Deborah's financial situation has worsened dramatically. After her ousting from the HOA, it turns out that she had been living far beyond her means, using HOA funds for personal gain, and embezzling money from the association for years. When the HOA board investigated her finances, they discovered numerous violations, and Deborah was forced to sell her house to cover her debts. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood, and Alexander can't help but feel a sense of justice as he watches Deborah's world crumble around her. The real kicker. Alexander's neighbors have rallied together and, in a stroke of poetic justice, they've helped a lovely young couple, Sarah and David, purchase Deborah's former house. The couple is exactly the kind of people Deborah had never imagined living in her neighborhood: young, ambitious, and, most importantly, not conforming to her racist standards. The irony isn't lost on anyone, and it only adds to the sense of satisfaction that everyone in the neighborhood is experiencing. With Deborah gone, the neighborhood feels lighter, freer. There's a renewed sense of camaraderie, and Alexander is finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. His family has been through so much, and while things aren't perfect yet, there's hope for the future. The lingering tension in the air dissipates, and Alexander knows that standing up for his family and not allowing Deborah to bully him paid off in ways he hadn't expected. After everything that happened, Alexander Pierce finally finds peace. With Deborah Miller out of the picture, he's able to focus on his family, especially Sarah, who is on the road to recovery. The tension that had once plagued their home, brought on by Deborah's harassment and entitlement, is finally gone. Alexander and his family can now breathe easier, without the constant anxiety of dealing with a neighbor who thought she could control their lives. The icing on the cake comes when Deborah's house is auctioned off. Alexander, feeling a mix of satisfaction and disbelief, watches as Deborah loses everything she had so desperately clung to. Her house is purchased at a steep discount, and Alexander decides to turn it into something positive for the community. He plans to transform the house into a community center, a place where neighbors can come together without fear of being judged or fined for small infractions. The idea of creating a safe space for everyone, free from the authoritarian grip of people like Deborah, fills Alexander with a sense of fulfillment. Deborah, now homeless and living out of her car, has been completely blacklisted from the town and all nearby communities. Her reputation, once built on manipulation and racism, has crumbled completely. Even more satisfying, she has been banned from every HOA in the state. Her life, once full of privileges and control, has now turned into a cautionary tale. Alexander can't help but chuckle at the poetic justice of it all. The woman who once tried to tear his family apart is now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a symbol of the consequences of unchecked entitlement. As for Sarah and the kids, life begins to return to normal. The neighborhood feels warmer, more inclusive, and welcoming. People who had once kept their distance from Alexander and his family now approach them with smiles and open arms. Alexander's stance against Deborah and her behavior has not only secured his family's safety but also ignited a change in the entire community. In the end, Alexander realizes that standing up for himself, his family, and his home was the best thing he could have done. It wasn't just about dealing with one malicious neighbor, it was about setting a precedent for the entire neighborhood, showing that racism, entitlement, and bullying wouldn't be tolerated. As for Deborah, her downfall is complete, and Alexander can finally rest easy, knowing that justice was served. He's made peace with what happened, but he'll always remember the lesson: never let someone like Deborah Miller dictate your life. Sometimes, karma really does take care of things, but it's always better to stand up and face the challenge head-on.